Hi, and welcome to this episode of CultureCast. Today, we're going to be talking about the film Viva Cuba, which, in short, is a film about two kids in Cuba named Malu and Jorgito. They come from conflicting political backgrounds, and their families hate each other. Um, Malu's mom wants to leave the country and go to America, and in order to do that, she needs permission from Malu's father, who lives across the country. Now, Malu does not want to leave the country. She wants to stay in Cuba with her friend Jorgito. So she decides to run away with her friend Jorgito to find her dad and get him not to sign the papers. In the end, the families come together to try to find the kids together and put aside their differences in order to find the children. So, any thoughts on this movie and what it consists of?
Well, I found the narrative structure to be very interesting. Some aspects followed the Bildungsroman development, where the kids are falling in love and they kind of ran away together to the end of the island to find Malu's father. It followed a chronological series of events, and there is a heavy influence of all the implied events with the differing familial statuses where each child came from a different background. And then there was a lot of interpretation at the ending also, whether the children died or did not die.
Should we explain the end of
Yeah.
the movie?
Yes.
So the end of the movie, they are standing on a cliff together, holding hands while their whole families are arguing, and then this huge wave crashes, and it kind of cuts to black. So there's it's a mysterious ending on whether or not they die, which is why this is sort of compared to a movie like Romeo and Juliet, where there's two families who are conflicting, and the children are either in love or very good friends, and they're killing themselves for each other.
Obviously, can't really show children dying. No one
Yes.
really likes to watch that, especially at the end of a movie that doesn't really take itself too seriously. A lot of the time, it's often a lot funnier than you might expect based on the subject material.
It seems like it was a movie that was made for children. It was very lighthearted. It was all from the point of view of children. There was a lot of magical elements, like the stars. They had writing through the stars, and there was an animated character in one of the scenes. So it definitely would have been very dark to include.
Yeah, I think it
suicide.
portrays the raw reality of Cuba, but it's aimed for children. So it's
Yeah, I find that interesting that there's such serious content in it, but at the same time they present it in a way that's kid-friendly, which I found very...
Especially the political ideologies.
Exactly.
Like the reason that the families don't get along is because they're members of two different Cuban political societies.
And not even just political societies, they're different economically as well, even though they live right across the street and have different ideologies. One family is much more well off than the other, and you can see the behaviors in the different families. Like the family that's well off, Malu's family, they're much more prim and proper and keep to themselves more, whereas Jorgito's family is on the lower end of the economic scale, and they're much more loud, and his father beats him, and there's just a lot of differences within the households that aren't solely political.
And there's only small hints of the political parts, but it sort of is just more it's teaching children about what's going on. It's more informative of their country standing at that time.
Exactly. I like how they use their use of time is that they picked a time where Castro was in power, which is recently, and there's a lot of political tension in the air, and the fact that the two children that decided to run away from each other came from opposite backgrounds added to the excitement of the play. And the plot development, that had something to do with it too. The use of time helps with the plot development because the families go from hating each other because of their political backgrounds and their differences, but they come together for their kids because that's the one commonality that they have. They love their children. So, but then when they find their kids, they go right back to hating each other. So it's amazing what...
So this film's plot is very similar to Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, there's a few other movies that we connected it to as well. Stand By Me, Moonrise Kingdom, West Side Story, all of them have coming of age parts, which again connects to the Bildungsroman. where in Moonrise Kingdom, for example, the two kids run away because they had fallen in love, and their parents are both after them, trying to get them to come home, and then there's all these different parties that are against them as they're like just fighting to be together.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about West Side Story?
Yeah, I think the interesting connection between these two is that West Side Story deals with the sort of like warring sides in relation to specifically like Latino population. So we have Cuba in Viva Cuba, and I think they come from Puerto Rico in West Side Story, but it's very geared towards like the social differences, where Romeo and Juliet is strictly just like two families that don't like each other because of reasons. This is more like, why don't they like each other? And that's really where the conflict comes in. And it's interesting because the kids have no concept of this whatsoever. Like literally, like they have no like idea like why their parents don't like each other. And it's because of the political ideologies. But I mean, they're children. They don't see that. Kids are they're much more pure, and they don't really have that understanding of that.
Yeah,
So,
they're only told don't play with Jorgito or don't play with Malu. They're not. That's why they don't take it seriously, because they they just see each other as human beings.
I do think Malu considers herself like more, like better than Jorgito.
Yeah.
I think she portrays that in the movie. I feel that.
Like the one scene where she makes fun of Jorgito because he was called her little brother. And they're like, take care of your little brother. She was very like, ha ha, I'm better than you.
Yeah. Yeah. But at the end of the day, they see each other as people. They don't see each other as a certain political ideology, and they just want to play together at the end of the day. So, do we want to talk about tone and irony and themes of it?
I will handle tone. So the tone of this movie, this is where the movie really derails, because I mean we talked about how it's like a children's movie and it's geared towards that, but that causes a lot of problems with tone because there's a lot of serious stuff that's going on, and it's played for either lighthearted or like really weird, and there's different scenes that just don't really connect. Like the scene where her grandma dies is like super jarring and like really disturbing, and kind of like it's all over the place. The camera movements are crazy, and then there's other scenes where they're just like dancing and laughing, and there's some weird hallucinogenic creature behind him when he's sick. Like it's just
so weird.
Yeah, the tone of the movie is all over the place, and it really causes the movie to suffer because I just got so annoyed with that element of it, the fact that it doesn't pick a tone, whether it's lighthearted or not, because it's dealing with these serious issues. Like they're literally like in school, like there's like political chants that they have to like Viva Castro or whatever all that stuff is, and then it's just like supposed to be like lighthearted fun, and it never really balances the two of those well.
I feel like that is part of like them being children, like even like the camera's down at the level of where the children's height is, so it's kind of just like from the point of view of the children, they don't really know what's going on, so they're kind of just like experiencing everything as it comes, and they don't take everything that seriously, which is for better or for worse.
And there's irony in the fact that, like I said before, the two kids who run away together happen to be from families with contradicting political views, so that's very ironic. And I'd say the theme of it is that the people come together and put aside their differences in times of trouble because, as mentioned before, they hate each other when the kids are safe, but as soon as they're in danger, they come together, and then as soon as the kids are safe again, they start to hate each other again. So
yeah, the theme does definitely like conflict because throughout it, it's all like unity, we're connecting even though we're different, and then it kind of just
destroys at the end.
Suicide and
Shatters.
turn.
Takes a dark turn.
I think that's interesting because it shows like even at the end, like when they've gone through all of this together, they lose sight of what was important. Like as soon as they get the kids back, they're not like happy. They start like yelling at them. They're like, "Why'd you do this?" Instead of like looking at them and understanding why they're doing this, which is obvious. Like they don't want to not ever see each other again, and because they lose sight of that, that's just when everything goes wrong, and the kids run away, and the parents are screaming at each other. So it's really like the ending is pointing towards like staying on the message, like understanding what opportunities are given
Yeah, like
to you.
at that point, like the children are definitely, people always seem to treat children like they don't know what they're talking about, but the kids like knew like it's better to stay together and like be united, and then they kind of just were like, you guys don't know what you're doing. We all hate each other again.
Yeah.
That was another very ironic part, how the children were much more like with it. They understood what was going on, and the parents were kind of the ignorant ones where they wouldn't put aside their differences for the greater good.
Yeah, and I think that brings about the motifs of unity and connection across differences, and migration, segregation, and friendship. Those are all different motifs that have to do with this film as well. Do we want to talk about the aesthetic elements or the representation of community or other things?
About how this looks like
It's very
an
low
elementary, an elementary school Spanish video.
It does.
And like that's partly due to, I mean, it's it's a low budget film. I don't think there's anything around
It's
that.
not
but
in a country that like cranks out
Yeah.
high quality cinema all the time, but
Well, and this movie is like from 2000.
yeah,
3, I
yeah,
believe.
it's an
Four.
it's an older film. Yeah.
Yes.
But it just feels low budget. Like a lot of times filmmakers can make movies feel like they have a higher budget than it is, but just through cinematography and all that, it always feels like it's low budget and not really trying to boost the cinematic nature of the movie any more than just low budget.
Yeah.
But adding to like the aesthetic elements definitely like contribute to the tone of it being sort of all over the place, because even though it has these dark topics, it's very like vibrant, like every single shot, no matter until the very end where the music kind of cuts off when everybody's screaming and like it's much more chaotic.
The music was insane. It was all over the place.
It
was like super
Yeah.
like intense, like really happy music when it just did not belong at all.
And speech and dialogue too. There was a lot of frequent dialogue throughout the film, and the dialogue among the children, a lot of yelling between the adults, whereas again the children just communicated normally, which adds to that irony of the kids in a way were more mature throughout the film than the adults were. They use a lot of slang specific to their culture, and
It definitely reflected where they were. The movie was set. Everybody, the lower class family, Jorgito's family, was speaking much more like, I don't know, foul language, and they're much louder, whereas Malu and her mother spoke much more like proper, and
Like poised.
Yeah.
respectfully, yeah.
they thought about what they were saying before they said it.
Yeah.
As a community, it definitely like, as we said before, it represents like the Castro supporters and the non-Castro supporters, and like the whole divide. And then also like the other things that are sort of more subtle was like the prevalence of the police. Like everywhere they went, yes, they were missing children, but there was literally police like readily available at like the parade and like all of these different places.
They knew that the kids were missing because they didn't go to school for one day.
Yeah.
Like, they were like, the government was super hands-on.
Like these children are like running across the country, and it was just like these sort of background things. Like the forward story was like, oh, these two kids like each other and want to go find their father, but in the background it's like they're only doing that because they want to leave Cuba because it's in like this police state and like Fidel's in control and they want to go to America.
Yeah. Use of space and settings. The settings were always moving, and it was like a cat and mouse game in a way, as the kids tried to reach the father. And for a lot of the movie, like he said, like the police are following them a lot of the time. And I also wanted to make a connection to today. Maybe not as extreme in America, but there are a lot of political differences, and like the political climate is very heated recently, and I think that something similar to this could happen one day if it got any worse. So I found that interesting, and I connected that to today's society. Like,
And the littlest things from like Facebook friends, like there's so many people since the election that have been like, I will not be friends with you if you are of this political party beliefs. And it's kind of just gotten polarized to that point where it's similar to like the Fidel Castro situation.
yes.
I think that's
No, it's easy.
I think that's a good place to leave off. I think can leave everyone with that thought.
Yes.
Think about
Oh,
where
really
this country is
dark.
heading.
You don't want to end up like Malu and Jorgito in the wave.
Also
Okay.
think about your children. Like they are the most affected in these conflicts. Like they
Yes.
usually are left off and not ask for their opinion and how they feel.
Educate
like-
them on what's going on, definitely.
So that they
But,
don't run away.
like, political polarization is definitely a huge issue that's in a lot of countries, but like unity definitely beats out
Exactly.
being hateful.
So let's talk about Juan Carlos Remata Malverti, which is the director.
Oh,
Of this movie.
Yes.
And
Yes.
he's famous because of actually this movie, which received the Best Children's Film Award at the Cannes International Film Festival in 2005. So,
Impressive.
Yes. That's amazing.
so he's from Cuba, and he has had many other Cuban films, and
Yeah.
what's that?
Awesome.
Wow. All right. So I think that's all we have for today. So we'll see you next time on CultureCast. Have a great day.
Bye.